I'd like to acknowledge the Larrakia people as the traditional owners on the land in which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and future. I've had the privilege and honour of living here on Larrakia country for 21 years now, and it's such a wonderful part of the world. And it's with great pleasure that I now introduce Nicole Brown and William Hewitt from Larrakia Nation to welcome us to their country. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Malad Mabachiwa. In the Larrakia language, that means good day. To those of you who've traveled far and wide to be here, Damraliji, welcome. For the rest of you like me who get to call this place home, how lucky are we? Today we stand together on the ancient soil, rich with the footsteps of my ancestors, the stories of our dream time, and the spirits of Larrakia land, home to my saltwater people. As a proud descendant of theirs, I pay my respect to those that came before me and our current and emerging leaders. Their wisdom and their teachings are embedded in us. I'd also like to extend respect to other Larrakia and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today and pay respects to your elders past, present and emerging. A big thank you for inviting us along to your event. In the spirit of peace, understanding and respect, we, the custodians for this land, are responsible for sharing important messages with visitors to our country. So why me, you may ask? Born on this breathtaking country 38 years ago to my Larrakia mother, I've had the privilege of witnessing my beautiful home grow and become the melting pot of cultures it is today. Rich, diverse, modern, mixed with the tradition and history of this country. Now, although we're known as saltwater people due to the pristine Arafura Sea that surrounds Larrakia country, people don't realize our boundaries extend 50 kilometres inland, taking in the Cox Peninsula in the west, Gun Point in the north, Adelaide River in the east, and down to Mountain Dam in the south. It was this beautiful, vibrant landscape steeped in tradition and culture that saw my ancestors establish the first trade routes in the region, guided by their knowledge of the land, the sea, and the sky. The richness of the country was crisscrossed by generations of brilliant nations, with our people being the continent's first explorers, navigators, engineers, farmers, botanists, and scientists, to name a few. Our coastal nations watched and interacted with at least 36 contacts made by Europeans prior to 1770, many of them resulting in the charting of the northern, the western, and southern coastlines. The North was an incredible natural draw card for those adventurous explorers, and is where my old people stood as they watched unknown floating objects carrying people with different colored skin tones approach their coastlines in 1839, signaling the beginning of colonization. In the 184 years since, we faced many significant moments. Continued European settlement, World War II, Cyclone Tracy. Still, we survived, we endured, and now we're thriving. Our stories, our songlines, and our ceremonies continue to this day. One of these important ceremonies, the Welcome to Country, signifies the coming together of people from different tribal groups, often marked with a big gathering to showcase the beginning of something new and to let ancestors know who's on country to keep them safe while they're traveling. That's why I'm here. Any Welcome to Country reflects the stories and knowledge passed down through generations. For my people, one of the most important stories is the tale of Old Man Rock, which is just a little bit further down there if you're out exploring. It's visible at Casuarina Beach at low tide. It's actually one of my favorite stories. Know that when you spot that long flat rock, that it represents an ancestral spirit that binds my people together. His name was Nungalinya. He was our protector ancestor. He was our creator. One of our elders, Annie June Mills, speaks fondly of him. Nungalinya is just one of many ancestors who walked across the landscape and shaped it during the dream time. When we talk about old people like Nungalinya, they were significant. They were real, but back then they were so much bigger. Stories like this need to be shared. Why? Because it's a part of history. By sharing them, we stay connected. Every afternoon, I sit quietly down at the beach. I bury my feet in the sand. I feel my old people all around me. I'm connected to them through country. I know when the wind blows the leaves out of the trees and rays of light come through the branches and the sweet smell of that Arafura sea fills my nostrils, that they're all around me, watching, guiding, and protecting. We're now in what is known as the Darrell Gang time of the year, one of the 7 Larrakia seasons. Darrell Gang is hot and humid. It's our build-up season. Box jellyfish are now seen in Dawiriba, or thunder and lightning can be seen soon enough. King tides occur at this time of the year, and the wind blows mainly from the northwest. The ground's hot, the winds die down, and it leaves a tenseness in the air. Personally, for me, we're coming into my favorite time of the year, the wet season. Every single day at the moment, I look out my window and pray for those dark gray clouds to come. It is bloody hot. I know when I see those dark rain clouds that there is cool respite on its way. I want to share with you 2 things that tell me I'm in Darwin. So the smell of that rain hitting a scorching hot road and watching the steam rise off. It's one of my favorite things to see. And being smacked in the face with heat as I exit a plane at the airport. That tells me I'm really home. I've done a lot of reflecting about the path I'm on now because my old people already walked it. The word journey has attached itself to my everyday thoughts. Those that came before me, the custodians of stories and the keepers of my sacred ancestral bloodline all have one thing in common: the love for their family, their people, their country, and their community. Sharing one of the world's longest and richest DNAs gives me hope, not only for the future of First Nations Australians, but all Australians, as we walk side by side on this lifelong journey together. Closing, some special words I want to leave you with. Listen, absorb it, take it in. It's spoken by one of our elders, Auntie Bundilla Barbara Mills Raymond. We talk to country and our country talks to us. This is Larrakia country and we are Larrakia people. We'll always be here. Please respect our country. May your time here on my beautiful Larrakia country be filled with learning, with understanding, and with unity. May you feel the embrace of the land, connecting with its history and its future. When you leave, may the echoes of our shared experience remain with you, nurturing a deep respect for the diverse tapestry of cultures that makes up this great nation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicole and William. That was wonderful welcome, and so those stories of that rich connection to country and culture. Thank you for sharing, Nicole. I now have a few housekeeping things just to just to share with everyone, we do have over 220 participants attending in person or via Zoom, and for everyone online, we've set it up so that cameras and microphones are muted. But we just wanted to let you know that we are moderating the chat function. So if you have a comment or a question online, please type it into the chat function and we can relay it here to be a question in the seminar room. I'd also like to acknowledge that there will be some sensitive material shared today, given the focus is on mental health and diabetes. We've included a list of mental health resources and contact numbers on the back of the program. Also here at Menzies, there are 3 rooms with phone access that are available if you require a private space to access online or phone support. Please contact anyone from Menzies for further information about those rooms. For those here in person, we'll keep the front door here closed once the sessions have commenced. We have a very tight timeline today, so you can always use the back door to access the auditorium if need. And we really appreciate people being prompt to return to sessions after the breaks. Thank you. We'll also be giving all speakers both a 5-minute and a 1-minute warning so that we really do stick to time. I think that's all the housekeeping. Oh, in the foyer there are bathrooms and an emergency exit is out here. Anything else on the housekeeping team that I've forgotten? It's now my pleasure to introduce Associate Professor Renee Kirkham. When I commenced in the role this year of Deputy Director of Research at Menzies, we transitioned leadership of the Diabetes Across the Life Course Partnership here at Menzies from myself to Renee, and it's been an absolute pleasure to hand over to Renee, who's done a wonderful job this year in leading the team and leading the organisation of this symposium today. I think it's our 12th annual symposium, which is a pretty amazing feat, and thank you all who've contributed to those over the years, and a huge thank you to all the team who've organised it today. It's going to be an amazing day, so over to Renee. Thank you.
I too would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land we're meeting on today, the Larrakia people, and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. I also really want to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here with us today in the room, and those also joining us online at satellite sites in Cairns and Alice Springs, and those who may be watching some of the sessions at a later date. As Louise just mentioned, we're okay. In April this year, I was fortunate enough to be appointed to the position of lead of the Diabetes Across the Life Course Partnership. And as many of you are well aware, Louise established this group in 2011 and has done an incredible job at growing the focus of the research from diabetes in pregnancy to being an enormous program of work looking at diabetes across the life course. Specifically, our research now focuses on the intergenerational burden of we go back a slide, I think. The intergenerational burden of cardiometabolic conditions, prevention and also implementation projects. No, just that one. Thank you. Thanks so much. It's an absolute privilege to be working with such an incredible group of people within the partnership, both researchers in the group, but also so many of our external stakeholders and key collaborators, many of whom are here with us today. The track record of the partnership clearly highlights the positive impact that effective partnerships can have. In my new leadership role, I will endeavour to continue to build and maintain meaningful partnerships in an effort to support the important work being undertaken by our group. I welcome you all here today to our 2023 Annual Educational Symposium with our focus on mental health and diabetes, strong minds and healthy futures. I hope you find today's program informative and insightful, and that it inspires research translation to improve diabetes outcomes across Northern Australia. Yeah, we can do the next one. Thanks. The vision of the partnership is to work in partnership with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, primary healthcare and community controlled health organisations to break the cycle of type 2 diabetes and related conditions. We have three main priorities. The first is to prevent and improve management of obesity and diabetes across the life course, to strengthen community engagement in a life course approach to diabetes focusing on preconception, pregnancy and youth, as well as the third priority to strengthen Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community-based workforce in diabetes. Sorry. Yep, thanks. In the Northern Territory, we are we able to just move that? Sorry, that one. Oh, thanks. Many of you are aware that in the NT we are experiencing a diabetes epidemic. So recent data led by Dr. Matt Hare, who's a clinical researcher within our group, shows the rates of diabetes in remote Northern Territory Aboriginal population is unfortunately the highest in the world. 1 in 3 adults are living with type 2 diabetes, and 40% of adults in remote Central Australian communities have type 2. These rates have doubled in the last 15 years. The age of onset of diabetes is relatively young, with high incidence among people aged between 30 to 59. There is a higher prevalence of diabetes observed among Aboriginal women than men, and substantial growth has occurred in the prevalence of Aboriginal women diagnosed with diabetes in pregnancy, or with type 2 diabetes prior to pregnancy. One of the many impacts of this high prevalence that we don't often talk about or acknowledge is mental health and well-being. It's really important for us to consider how individuals must feel when they have to leave community and country to access healthcare. We also need to be thinking about what impact does the high rates of complications and death among individuals have on communities. All of these experiences continue to add to the ongoing trauma experienced by so many. But it's also really important to acknowledge the resilience and strength of First Nations people globally and in Australia. The National Strategic Framework for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's mental health and social and emotional wellbeing acknowledges that social and emotional wellbeing are influenced by important structural determinants that shape the dynamics of power, human rights and justice, and the access and distribution of resources. It also helps us to identify where resilience and strength can be drawn from. These include wellbeing domains such as connection to country, connection to land, community, and culture. It's important to acknowledge that in Australia, the impacts of colonisation underpin many of the social determinants of health and subsequent mental health outcomes. Social and emotional wellbeing impact the prevention and management of diabetes. Today, we want to shine a light on the significance of this and to begin to break down the silos that exist between the disciplines of diabetes and mental health. We acknowledge that there are structural and systemic challenges that need to be addressed, and we want to emphasise the importance of addressing these to improve health outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Throughout the day, we'll be showcasing research, hearing from our lived experience speakers, as well as experts in diabetes and mental health, along with policymakers and other key stakeholders. We will provide some insights and examples of how you may better address some of the mental health needs of people living with diabetes, and we'll also welcome discussion around how some of these issues may be addressed through policy and practice change. The theme Strong Minds and Healthy Futures is also timely, given the recent disappointing outcome of the Voice to Parliament referendum. It's critical that we all consider the impact that this has had on the social and emotional wellbeing of so many Australians. I want to acknowledge that now, more than ever, we need to be working in true, respectful partnerships to support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to live the healthy lives and have the healthy futures that they deserve. We need to ensure that the strategies to preventing and managing diabetes are community-led and meet the needs of those impacted. It's absolutely critical that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are given a voice in developing these solutions. In the Diabetes Partnership, we endeavour to work through meaningful collaboration with individuals, communities and other partners that we hope will benefit from our research and its translation. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Advisory Group in the partnership are a really important governing body who provide necessary guidance to ensure that our ways of working are collaborative and meaningful. It's now appropriate that I introduce Sian Graham, a Bardi-Jawi and Noongar woman from One Arm Point in the Kimberley and the Balladong region of Western Australia. Sian is the Aboriginal research leader of the Diabetes Partnership, who founded and chairs the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Advisory Group. She has continuously invested in research capacity and leadership and advocated for the importance of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander governance within our research.
Good morning, everyone. Oops. So good morning, everyone. Before we get down to business, I'd like to start by breaking the silence surrounding the referendum and share with you my perspective. I do recognise the diversity of opinions around the vote. Regardless of the outcome, I believe the process of the referendum indicated the continuing inequities that exist in our society. Regardless of the outcome, it still impacted us in so many ways. So many of us felt the impact of being divided. It spoke volumes about the change that still needs to occur. Given our focus on mental health, I want to share with you the impacts I have faced with the outcome of the referendum. So I woke up Monday morning post-referendum thinking, how am I going to come to work and act like I'm okay? How am I possibly going to be okay when Australia has just taken away the opportunity to have a voice? Again, silenced, again, begging for a seat at the table. Again, our lives in the hands of others. The referendum brought back feelings and emotions we as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people try to suppress and heal from. And I can feel it now. Lived experiences of trauma, lived experiences of racism. Constantly having to conform to the systems that breathe intergenerational and structural racism. The wounds, once again, have been opened. Australia has rejected us. Once again, we're knocked to the ground. But that's okay, don't worry, because we'll continue to get up just like we have for 60,000 years, generation to generation. This is not the end, but this is just the beginning. Continue fighting for our rights, continue fighting for our voice, continue fighting for our people and our communities, fighting for our sovereignty, fighting to improve our health, fighting the systems that oppress us. We're tired. The week of silence allowed us to process this outcome. Silence allowed us to heal, and silence gave us that strength to continue fighting. Although the outcome of the referendum has pushed us backwards, and I think we all know that, it's so important that we continue moving forward, continue fighting for the rights of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We must continue to create platforms for our people's voices to be heard, because we will not be silenced. There is hope because we will create it. We will continue to fight. We will continue to advocate. and we will enforce change. This space needs to be created together. The partnership is a great example of how Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and non-Indigenous people come together and work in true partnership. This is reconciliation. This is now filtered out through our governance model. Our cultural governance is led by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leaders, privileging Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voices and leadership from the ground. This is shifting the dynamic and flipping the existing state of affairs. Our sovereignty remains, and no one can take that from us. Welcome everyone to the 2023 Education Symposium.
Thank you, Sian. We are running a little bit ahead of time, which is pretty amazing. So we're going to keep going and take advantage of that. It's an absolute privilege this morning to be able to introduce Alison Dart and Jackie McGee from Manitoba in Canada. I can see Alison there online. So we've got Dr. Alison Dart is an associate professor at the University of Manitoba in Canada and a paediatric nephrologist and clinician researcher at the Children's Hospital Research Institute of Manitoba. Her research focuses on improving outcomes in children living with type 2 diabetes and Indigenous populations. Alison is also the co-lead of the iCare study. And Jackie will be co-presenting today with Jackie McGee, who is the co-chair of the iCare Study Advisory Group and from the Wayway Sikapo First Nation in Canada. A mother of a child living with type 2 diabetes, she was also diagnosed with type 2 diabetes herself in 2012. They will be talking today on the psychosocial determinants of diabetic kidney disease in youth with type 2 diabetes, specifically on findings from the Canadian iCare cohort.
Hey. Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you. Thanks, Alison. Are you able to get the slides there? Thanks.
Okay. Thank you so much for inviting us to do this presentation. It's nice to see some familiar faces across the globe. And I feel very privileged to be able to co-present today with Jackie McGee here from Canada. You can go to the next slide. I'd just like to start with acknowledging the land from which we are presenting here in Canada, at the heart of Turtle Island, which is the name for the lands now known as North and Central America. It's a name used by some Indigenous peoples who believe their land was formed on the back of a turtle. And we are located in Manitoba, which is right at the heart of Turtle Island. There are 5 treaties in our province of Manitoba. I am speaking from Treaty 1 territory, and Jackie is actually speaking from Treaty 4 territory, 4 hours away. So it's really great with technology to be able to be co-presenting across the world. I'd like to acknowledge that I am a 3rd-generation Canadian, and all of my grandparents were settlers on this land here in Canada. I'd like to acknowledge my privilege and my dedication to addressing the harms that have come to the Indigenous children living on this land because of colonization. And the children that I look after in my clinic have been directly impacted by colonization, and I am very privileged to be able to work in partnership with Indigenous partners like Jackie to try and make their lives better. I'll just let Jackie introduce herself as well before we move on to the objectives.
Thank you, Alison. I'd just like to say it's a great privilege and honor to be participating in this symposium. I'm kind of nervous, so if I make some mistakes, just bear with me. But yeah, I have a son who is 27 years old, and 2 months before he turned 13, he was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Diabetes runs on both sides of my family now. And like was said before, I too am living with type 2 diabetes. So yeah, I'll let Alison go ahead with the presentation, and I'll jump in when I need to. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. You can go to the next slide. So these are the objectives for the next 20 minutes or so. We'd like to share a little bit about the Canadian context for youth living with type 2 diabetes, and discuss the importance of mental health with respect to complications, including diabetic kidney disease, and then present some potential strategies to improve mental health outcomes in youth living with type 2 diabetes that our group has been working on. Next slide. So in Canada, the incidence of type 2 diabetes in children is about 155 per 100,000 children, which is about 25 times higher than all other Manitoba children. And you can see in the figure on the right side that the Northern Health region is most affected by type 2 diabetes in our province, and especially children that are living in isolated reserve communities. Much higher rates than what we're seeing in urban centers in Manitoba. Next slide. Unfortunately, the legacy of colonialism has contributed to these high rates of diabetes in Canada, as you are seeing in your own country. The loss of land, loss of language and culture have had significant impacts on the health of children. And specifically the long-term impacts of the residential school system and the significant early life stressors that have continued to impact future generations of children. Next slide. This is data from a national study that was First Nation led, and it shows that many First Nation people in Canada live in rural and remote areas where they may have limited access to many things, including healthy food, transportation, utilities, clothing, shelter, and childcare. And all of these things impact their ability to live a healthy life. Next slide. This is a photo of one of the First Nation communities where about a third of the children live in our study called iCare. And you can see that it's a small community and it's very isolated. You can see photos from the summer months as well as the winter and the off-season months. In the summer, the only way to get to this community from an urban center is to fly in an airplane. And during the winter, you can drive in on the winter road. And then on the off seasons, when the ice is tenuous, you're looking at hovercraft. So getting in and out, healthy food, supplies, and healthcare workers can be a significant challenge. Next slide. Unfortunately, also First Nation people experience significant challenges in the healthcare system as well when they do seek care. And although some people like to think racism is not part of the healthcare system, these are two modern examples of racism that really impacted two First Nation individuals. Brian Sinclair was an Indigenous man that passed away in our own emergency department here in Winnipeg from urosepsis because he was thought to be intoxicated and kind of slumped over his wheelchair, and nobody realized that he was septic, and it wasn't until he had passed away that it was identified that he needed really medical care for his condition. And Joyce Echaquan is a First Nation woman in Quebec whose delirium from her cardiac condition was misinterpreted as an opioid ingestion. And unfortunately, she didn't get the care she needed for her heart condition, and she also passed away. So these are real challenges that First Nation children and families are experiencing in our own healthcare system that contribute to their mental health challenges and to their challenges living with their chronic health conditions. Next slide. Many studies have now looked at rates of depression in youth with type 2 diabetes. Here are 3 examples from the United States, and you can see that rates range between just under 15 to just over 20% of symptoms of depression, and girls seem to have a higher risk of depression. Next slide. This is data from an administrative healthcare study in our own province of Manitoba, led by Dr. Elizabeth Sellers, who's part of our team. And she compared rates of mental health conditions that were found using billing claims in the hospital administrative healthcare data. And they found that mood and anxiety disorders, attempted and completed suicide, and prescriptions for mental health conditions were significantly higher in youth living with type 2 diabetes as compared to youth living with type 1 diabetes. So there's increasing recognition that mental health is a very common comorbidity for youth living with diabetes. Next slide, please. This is an adult study that looked at hospitalizations and emergency department visits in adults living with type 2 diabetes, and they found that there was a significant increased risk of both of these outcomes if there was an identified mental health comorbidity, suggesting that mental health conditions do need to be addressed alongside diabetes in order to prevent adverse health outcomes. Next slide. Pediatric studies, however, have not shown the same associations. This study, these 2 studies actually evaluated associations between depression and glycemic control, and in fact did not find any significant association in these 2 studies. Next slide. There may, however, be an association with diabetic kidney disease, as was found in this study in adults with type 1 diabetes, and they identified a higher risk of progression of chronic kidney disease in adults that were living with a mental health comorbidity such as depression. And this was after controlling for important things like biological sex, their baseline diabetic kidney disease status, duration of diabetes, blood pressure, blood sugar control, and lipids. Next slide. There are some interesting associations being found between mental health or distress and inflammatory markers in the body. This study of children living with diabetes found a significant association with all of the inflammatory markers listed to the left of this slide and higher depression scores. So it may be that depression and stress increases inflammation in the body that might be linked with some of these adverse outcomes. Next slide. I got interested in youth onset type 2 diabetes as a master's student when I was working with Heather Dean and Elizabeth Sellers, 2 endocrinologists here in Manitoba. And using the clinical database, we linked youth living with type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes to administrative healthcare data. And you can see on the left what we found. About 50% of the youth that had been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes had progressed to kidney failure in their young adulthood, in their late 20s to early 30s, whereas the type 1 population had done very well with with no children, in fact, progressing to kidney failure. So this really highlighted the increased risk of diabetic kidney disease in the population here in Manitoba. And led us to start asking more questions about why this was happening and led to the cohort that we'll now describe to you. The right here shows similar results actually from, I believe it's Australia. First Nation people were at higher risk of progression to kidney failure, and young people were at significantly higher risk with similar rates of progression. About 50% of those that were diagnosed under age 30 were progressing to kidney failure. So it seems to be a common issue in multiple countries. Next slide, please. So this led to the development of our study, which is called iCare, which stands for Improving Renal Complications in Adolescents with Type 2 Diabetes Through Research. So it's kind of a long name, and it's not a study about eyes, which a lot of the kids wonder about when they first get started with us. And what we really wanted to understand was why young people seem to have higher risk of kidney failure in young adulthood. And so we started enrolling children between the ages of 10 and 18 years of age. And, at first we were really focused on what we knew: blood sugar, blood pressure, hyperfiltration, things that we learned about in medical school that were important for adults living with diabetes as far as risk factors for progression. So we were collecting urine, blood, and a lot of questionnaires. We did 24-hour blood pressure monitors, and, on we went. But what we soon realized was that we were missing a really important piece of risk here, and that we really needed some help from people that had more content experience than we did as care providers. And so that's when we reached out to some patients that we knew and some care providers that we knew, and we started a patient advisory group. So you can move to the next slide, and then I'm going to ask Jackie to jump in here.
Thank you. So I'll just speak to about our patient advisory group and what it means to me and what we do. One of the very first meetings that we had as a group, it was very important that we created a safe environment, and everyone had the opportunity to share their own lived experience, which is very important because it showed that we all had something in common. And then we were able to talk more freely, and we didn't have to worry that we were being judged or the youth were being judged, which is really important because many times youth and caregivers, when you go to seek medical attention, sometimes, not sometimes, a lot of times, there's prejudice that come along with that we brought this disease upon ourselves, and that is not the case. Being a part of the advisory group, it's a huge responsibility. Because we are speaking for children, youth who are living with this disease. It gives us an opportunity to speak, to have our voices heard, and our voices honored, which is really important. It also gives the youth in the group who come to the meetings an opportunity to speak, because a lot of times we think sometimes youth, they don't have information that is of value, but these youth do. They share their lived experience. They know what they're talking about. And the different people that come into our group, like sometimes we have researchers, scientists that come in, and it provides us with the opportunity to put a face to a blood sample. So when they're doing their experiments and all that, they can see somebody, and that's important to us. So it's putting that face to the disease as well. And what else? I will speak at the end regarding one of the members of our group. She's in the center there. Her name is Mary Jane Wood, but I will speak about her at the end of our session. On the side there, you can see there's an infographic that shows the youth struggles with type 2 diabetes. The trauma that is diagnosed the trauma of the diagnosis, the fears, the fears that they're going to go blind, they're going to lose their limbs, understanding the cause, the self surveillance, and the support. But one thing that is missing from here that the caregivers talk about is stress. So, and then all the other mental health issues that come along with that. So it's important that our youth in our group have a voice, and we're glad that they did this infographic. All right. Okay, Allison, go ahead.
Thanks, Jackie. You can go to the next slide. So after having spent that full day with this group and really hearing strongly, especially from the caregivers, that mental health was a really important factor that hadn't been adequately addressed in their clinic visits, wasn't talked about, it wasn't asked about, we started asking about it. And there was a lot of worry from the healthcare providers at first, or what are we going to do if we find there's mental health challenges, because we don't have enough supports to offer. We're diabetes doctors, we're kidney doctors. How do we support that? But we went ahead, because if we didn't start asking, we wouldn't, know what the real risk was, and then we could build resources, as a second step. So we built this theoretical model where we were still looking at biological exposures, but also asking questions about depression and anxiety and resiliency and social supports, and also asking questions about community and access, what they had access to in their community. What did that look like? Next slide, please. So we really shifted from a biological model to a biopsychosocial model because of the really strong encouragement from our patient partners. And so our study, which started in Winnipeg, then expanded to a national study in 8 centers across Canada. We've actually now recruited over 400 children with type 2 diabetes and have been following them, many of them for 5 years, and we're still continuing to recruit children. And our main outcome in the study is protein in the urine, non-orthostatic albuminuria, but we're collecting a lot of data about the psychosocial determinants of health as well. Next slide. This is a recent publication actually by somebody that is sitting in the room over there, Marilyn Purino. She wrote this up before she left our group in Winnipeg. The average age of the youth in the cohort is about 15 years old, and there is a female predominance here in Canada as well. Most of the kids have had diabetes for a short time, on average 2 years, and many of them do have high hemoglobin A1C levels, varying ranges of proteinuria, and a high BMI Z score. And you can see the ethnicity distributed here, predominantly an Indigenous population. Next slide. About 33% of the youth in the study have albuminuria, and almost 60% have hyperfiltration. And many of them also have hypertension based on 24-hour blood pressure monitoring. But importantly, 54% meet criteria for being stressed based on our questionnaires, and 17% meet criteria for significant mental health distress. And many of them live in low income quintile and have real access issues to healthy foods, with 55% having moderate to severe food insecurity, which we found is really an important risk factor for many of the health outcomes. Next slide. So we've tried to put all this together, and this is a structural equation modeling analysis that included some of the biological factors like hemoglobin A1C, blood pressure, duration of diabetes, and then also mental health, which is at the top, which includes a variety of different mental health questionnaires. And we also looked at different measures of socioeconomic status on the bottom. And what we found was that, yes, blood pressure and hemoglobin A1C are associated with kidney injury, but mental health is also important, not directly, but indirectly via inflammatory markers that we identified in the blood. And so we do feel that it is important to address as a determinant of kidney health in the population. And then social factors are, of course, also important, and our community partners have really advocated for us to be more in tune with health policy and advocacy for our patients in order to address this. Next slide. So our patient partners help make that complicated figure a little bit more understandable. And you can see 2 examples of infographics that the patient advisory group developed. The one on the right is the most recent one, which really just shows the key messages from that complicated analysis. And this is what we're going to be sharing with community and with patients so that they understand that we know mental health is important and something that we will be helping to address with them. Next slide. When we ask our patient partners, you know, what are your priorities? What do you fear most? Kidney disease doesn't come up. You know, time and time again, we've kind of reminded them, this is a study about kidney disease, but it's not necessarily top of mind for the youth. And so we really want to make sure that we hear that and that we are addressing their other priorities. And that we're, you know, working with them so that they do learn more about kidney health and how it is an important risk factor long term, but trying to meet them where they're at with their priorities. Next slide. Can you please click on that black box? There's a little video there. Oh, it doesn't look like you can hear it. Okay, that's too bad. Okay, so these are some messages from the parents and caregivers about, you know, how they're feeling about their children having diabetes and potentially at risk for complications, as well as some well wishes for the kids moving forward. The next slide is a video, and I hope it will work with sound. So this is a 1 minute long TikTok video that the group created. No sound, eh? Okay. Well, we'll share the link with you after. Unfortunately, it's a really nice. Oh, here we go.
Blood sugars because I don't want to know.
Thank you.
Sorry, Alison, we do actually have sound in the auditorium here, but we're just not sharing it.
Oh, okay.
So we'll try and
Go
fix
ahead.
that. Sorry. Do it when you share the screen. Is that right? Bear with us and we'll just quickly reshare our screen. Well, others online said the sound was working. So actually, maybe it's just at your end, Alison, sorry.
I did hear it right at the end as well. Yeah.
I don't want proof that I am doing bad. If I start to feel that my sugars are high, I panic. And then my first urge is to eat. I know, that's stupid. And I have to worry about complications like kidney disease. I feel like a burden and it's all my fault. Stop. Knowledge is power. If I know my blood sugar, I can change it. This isn't my fault. Research shows youth with type 2 diabetes need biological, social, and mental health supports. I have type 2 diabetes. I can't do this alone. We can't do this alone.
Thank you. We can go to the next slide. And I think this is you, Jackie.
One of the when we were talking in our patient advisory group, one of the things that I've mentioned, and I've said this over and over again, and it's based on experience as a parent, is that treating the mental health, I'll say it like in my son who is living with type 2 diabetes, treating their mental health is almost as equally important as the medication that that is prescribed to them to deal with or to live with their with this disease. There's so much when your blood sugars are high, and again, this is based on experience, when your blood sugars are high, like there's no sense, you can't reason with them. I'm just telling you from my own personal experience. And then once they start realizing what they're talking about, and then they you know, they get stressed, and then that stress causes, you know, inflammation in the body, and possibly increases their blood pressure and things like that. So that's the main message that I want to get out regarding mental health, is that mental health needs to be right up there with the medications that are given to the youth. Okay, Alison, go ahead.
Thanks, Jackie. All right, you can go to the next slide. So we've been very fortunate to have the opportunity to work with mental health specialists, because we realize that we're not the ones to be addressing mental health with the youth. And we are currently launching a pilot trial to test dialectical behavioral therapy with youth living with type 2 diabetes in our clinic. It's an online intervention for 16 weeks led by a psychologist that's focused on mindfulness, emotion regulation, distress tolerance, and interpersonal effectiveness. So it's skills-based training to help youth deal with the challenges that they're facing. Next slide. We unfortunately don't have a lot of time, but this is sort of where we're at. We have already completed our first pilot, and you can see the number of children we had to approach and screen to get them enrolled into this study. And so we've had some significant challenges finding the right youth that fit this intervention, because it's not individual therapy. So it's for youth that have some distress but don't have active suicidality or really need urgent care. So we're just about to start our second pilot, and we're really excited by the positive feedback we've had from the youth that have participated. And one of our patient advisory group members' families have already completed DBT, and it's really improved their ability to cope and manage, and also really help with their own relationship. And then go to the next slide. We also recognize the importance of Indigenous healing practices. Next slide. And so we're trying to incorporate Indigenous healing practices into this mental health based therapy as well moving forward. And so we've started with a scoping review to see what other groups have done in this space. Next slide. And some really important themes have emerged, including consulting with elders, having the intervention be community-based, accessible, and really keeping Indigenous research methodologies at the heart. A lot of heterogeneity, of course, based on the diversity of Indigenous nations that we're trying to address, because kids from our study come from all over the province. Next slide. So I just want to leave you kind of with these take-home points. Mental health challenges are common, and there seems to be an association indirectly with complications like diabetic kidney disease, and there is a real need for evidence-based treatments to address mental health. Next slide. I'd just like to acknowledge all of the people that are involved in this study: Brandy Wicklow, who is the co-PI of iCare, all of our investigators across Canada, our team, our mental health team, and of course our patients. And next slide. I'm just going to leave Jackie with the final word.
Thank you, everybody. On behalf of Alison and myself, I'd like to dedicate our presentation in memory of Mary Jane Wood. Mary Jane was one of the first youth in Manitoba in the early 1980s to be diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Mary Jane was a participant in our patient advisory group, and I would just like to dedicate this in her honor. And thank you, and miigwech, for allowing us to do our presentation.
Thanks, Jackie. You can go to the last slide. I think we've used up all of our time, so I don't know if there's any time for questions, but thank you for listening to us today.
Thank you so much, Alison and Jackie, for an incredible presentation. It's always great to hear about the work you're doing over there in the eye care study. And I just also would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to Mary Jane, because I know she was such an incredible person and has left an incredible legacy. We haven't got a lot of time, but I will open up for one question. Oh, Sean Taylor. Can someone please get Sean a microphone, or we can try. You could try and use your loud voice.
Yeah, no, thank you for that very comprehensive presentation. I do agree and support your findings around the association between depression and glycemic control and the evidence. I mean, I did a bit of study in the Torres Strait and Cape York in far north Queensland, and it demonstrated the same. And the high risk of kidney failure, which was predicted, to be a pandemic now. And we're going through a renal pandemic across the greater northern Australia and Australia as a whole. There's two questions I just wanted to ask. Do you think the health services in Canada are adequately funded to support the chronic disease pandemic? And what recommendations did your health service identify to address the stereotypes in the emergency department?
Okay. Thank you for those questions. The first question, I think, our healthcare system in the urban centers is very well supported and funded, but in the remote northern communities is woefully inadequate. There is no chronic disease system at all for screening, diagnosis, and treatment. So another area of interest of mine is screening for chronic diseases in First Nation children in the north and tying them into care. So lots of work needs to be done in that respect. With respect to Brian Sinclair, there was an inquiry and about 100 recommendations to improve how people are cared for in our emergency department.
Because in the Northern Territory, costs is estimated over $100,000 per patient. The health service just can't afford that. So I'm just thinking, is that the same issue in Canada?
For dialysis?
Yeah, well, I mean, yes.
Yes, yeah, it's a huge problem. I mean, I think the problem is that there's late diagnosis and lack of early treatment, and all of the funding is focused on end stage care and not on prevention. And so that's why we're trying to do more screening for young people. It's just so many things to address. But I think it's early diagnosis and treatment and chronic disease management systems that need to be built so that there's more regular care to prevent that progression.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Can I welcome everyone to join me with thanking Alison and Jackie? That was absolutely fantastic. I would like to now welcome, great, I was getting a bit worried because I couldn't see you, Rachel. Oh, Tina, sorry. All right, I'm jumping ahead. We're really grateful to have today Tina Brodie here, who's an Aboriginal postdoctoral researcher living and working on Kaurna country at the South Australian Health and Medical Research Institute. She has vast experience in clinical, project and leadership roles in Aboriginal health. Her research explores social and emotional wellbeing and the social determinants of health. We're very happy to have you here. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Thanks Renee. Thanks for having me here. I've been here on Larrakia country since Sunday. I attended a conference early this week, heading back today, but it's been really beautiful. Even in the build up, I've still really enjoyed being here. I just want to acknowledge that we're on Larrakia country, and yeah, I've had a beautiful week here and I'm grateful for the traditional owners for safe passage while I've been here. Just for context, just a little bit about Wadley Paringa for those of you who aren't familiar. So we're located on Kaurna country. Wadley Paringa was our name given to us by the Kaurna Language Committee, and so Wadley refers to house and Paringa means river. And so if you're familiar with Adelaide Kaurna Country. The Torrens River runs through the city, and our building that looks like a cheese grater or a pine cone is located just alongside. And it also is used to describe the reflection of the Milky Way in the River Torrens. So it's a really beautiful piece of the country. And I guess a little bit about Wadley Paringa. We have a really large program of work. Much of our work in the early days. So Professor Alex Brown was our first theme leader. He was there for over 10 years before he moved on more recently. And obviously our work really started out in sort of the biomedical space around cardiovascular disease and diabetes. Alex also has a really large longitudinal study in South Australia on diabetes. And all of our work there is really being driven by community, informed by community, and is underpinned by our engagement with community. So everything we do is based on community priorities and really governed by community as well. And I guess context for what I'm going to talk about today, a few years ago, I decided I wanted to do a PhD, and I came to Yarn to Alex, and my background is in social work, and he sort of went, oh, well, I've got a lot of stuff you can do around, the community's been really talking to me about wanting us to think about our diabetes study and some of our other work and really address the social determinants of health or social and emotional wellbeing. And so we really lined up. I was sort of the first one in this space in Wadley Paringa. So yeah, a little more about me. I'm an Aboriginal woman. My connections are to Yandrawonda and Yarrawonda, which is kind of the top corner of South Australia, the bottom corner of Queensland. I wasn't born on country. I was born in Kalgoorlie in Western Australia, and I lived there until I moved to Kaurna Country about 17 years ago. I'm a mum, and so that's sort of my standpoint. And I've already told you I was a social worker before, and I worked clinically for about over 10 years before I decided to transition into research. A lot of my work was really with Aboriginal children and families, so that's sort of my clinical background. Renee already sort of highlighted this morning, but I guess it really to centre it and ground it here within our work, really informed by the holistic wellbeing and social and emotional wellbeing. And the idea, I guess, talking today a little bit about the social determinants of health and how to position those within our social and emotional wellbeing framework. So that's how we conceptualise and think of the social determinants, and we also recognise the other determinants of health and how they have an impact on health and wellbeing for our mob. And I guess really acknowledging, others have touched on this today, that we're still living in ongoing colonial violence, and the recent referendum, as Sian was talking about this morning, has really impacted on us. And so this colonial experience is not over. The project is still going, and a lot of, I guess, mental health in particular and social emotional wellbeing are really impacted by ongoing colonial violence that we're experiencing. Usually try to take a strengths-based approach, so I'm not going to dwell too much in that, but just to really recognise it does impact us. So a little bit about in doing my PhD, the topic of the presentation is around the idea of knowledge to action. And so we know a lot about the social determinants of health in the sense that they are having an impact. We don't know a lot about what we should actually do about them. And so with my PhD project, we sort of integrated Indigenous and non-Indigenous knowledges to do a couple of key pieces of work to start to go, okay, what would it look like to take action in practice, in a really practical way around the social determinants of health. And obviously just, the idea is thinking of how to improve social and emotional wellbeing, and it's all sort of governed, and they had Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander governance over all of this work. And so I'll talk a little bit today just to kind of serve different interests, a little bit about sort of what we did, how we did it, so a little of the methodology and a little bit of what we learned from all of that. So hopefully there's something here for everyone. So the first study that we did was really to look at, just in South Australia, mental health outcomes and the social determinants of health. And so in South Australia, we have some other work that really worked with community around place-based work and defining sort of community boundaries in South Australia. And so we call these landscapes, and it uses basically statistical data at the sort of census level, SA2 data, and built these communities. So you can do all sorts of analysis, but it's not by government defined boundaries, it's by community defined boundaries. So we took this place-based approach to understand what might be happening for mental health and how the social determinants of health were impacting on that. And so it was really broad associations. It's not sort of a complex statistical analysis. And this is just one example of how we then took all of the social determinants of health for each of the landscapes. And then we also looked at mental health hospitalizations and emergency department presentations to see what sort of relationship they had. And I guess we were wondering what we were really hopeful for is that you might see where there were good outcomes for the social determinants of health, so high incomes or high education attainment, that maybe that line showing mental health would be lower. And what we found is that it was, you know, across all of the landscapes in South Australia, we have really high mental health hospitalisations, some of the highest in the country. And we also found that in terms of the social determinants of health, it was quite a grim picture. So there weren't a lot of community sort of regions or landscapes that had these really high, you know, high year 12 attainment, high income, high, as you can see from the one that I've got up there, across all of the regions, you know, generally less than 50% of the population were living above the poverty line. And so, you know, when you think about that, it's sort of, it's pretty hard to see what type of relationship there might be when so many are, you know, living in really tricky circumstances. So, and I guess the other thing to highlight, maybe I'll just move on to the next one, is that what we really acknowledge that mental health hospitalizations and emergency department presentations aren't the best reflection of mental health. And so I think, you know, collectively, when we're thinking about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander mental health, what's available to us in the data to really understand this from our perspective is very limited. And so what we have available is things like hospitalizations, and that's really at the pointy end of, you know, the most acute stage, rather than at this stage of people are in distress or, you know, not doing so well. So there's some real issues, I guess, with data and what we have available in terms of mental health to understand really what their burden and impact is for our community. And we really found that the needs were significant across all of our communities. And I guess we were like, well, we need to understand what we can do about it. So the second study was a scoping review. And so this one came from that place of going, we keep hearing the social determinants of health matter, but we're not really sure what we actually do about them systemically. So we set out to do a scoping review to look at, this was national, so of all programs in South Australia. Obviously, in Australia, we selected a scoping review because we really wanted to be able to get at grey literature. So, you know, programs that might not be in the peer review evidence, and just get a real sense of what action was actually happening around the social determinants of health for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. For some of you that might be interested, with the scoping review, consistent with the Indigenous methodology of my program of work, we really worked with the advisory group around that. So that was the same as, you know, defining what we wanted to ask, implementing searches, and also using the expertise of the advisory group to find programs, people, things that might be, you know, sort of buried that we would want to find. A little bit, I guess we did a really broad search. So you can see the additional searching box at the end. That's the one I just to highlight, I guess, is that's where the advisory group came in. They're all the ones from yarning to people that are in the, you know, sort of in the sector that were able to find further 7 sort of papers that were added into that. Just scanning down, we don't need to go through in too much detail, but in the end, we ended up with 32 programs that we included for extraction and had a closer look at. Around that, we extracted all sorts of things, you know, what the program was, what it delivered, you know, how it talked about the social determinants, all of that kind of thing. And we also did, we used the Create Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Quality Appraisal tool, and we used that not for inclusion and exclusion purposes, but to then go, well, based on what these programs that we have included, you know, how consistent are they with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, what, you know, ways of knowing, being and doing, I guess, ways of working, you know, and we sort of did a bit of a cultural appraisal as well. Just for interest, of the 32 programs, a lot of the stuff that we found, I guess we found them in all sorts of sectors, particularly, and I guess when it came to the social determinants of health, our key finding was that they're often referred to in really sort of abstract ways, you know, so people would say social factors, or, you know, in the papers or in the programs talk about we address social factors, or, you know, that type of thing. And what we found, as you can see on the sort of the right, the primary, we also looked at the health needs that were identified. So obviously there had to be a health program. We were interested in health and how health is doing the social determinants, not sort of anyone else. And we found lots of multiple or sort of programs, which meant it was, I guess, like, for example, people might be implementing something in diabetes and then, you know, talking about the social determinants of health as well and so on. But then once we looked closer at those, we didn't actually, oh, I've gone too far. We didn't actually find, you know, a lot of description of how programs were doing anything about the social determinants of health. More the describing that they acknowledged it mattered, they acknowledged it was having an impact, or they acknowledged that more needed to be done about the social determinants of health. And that was kind of it. So we found definitely this huge gap in action. And so we implemented, this comes back to that sort of conversation that I had with Alex when I first wanted to do a PhD. And he said, out of the Aboriginal diabetes study in particular, the governance of that project we're talking about, it's all well and good, Alex, that you're doing all this stuff around diabetes, but what about the social stuff? What about mental health? What about all of the other work? And so he approached an organisation, philanthropic in South Australia, and called the Wyatt Trust, and they funded us to do some work to do the social stuff. So that's kind of, so we really aim to identify the social and cultural needs of Aboriginal people and supporting the empowerment to act on the social determinants of health. So we implemented strengths-based approaches and ways of working. It was really participant-led, empowerment-focused and flexible, and we really aimed to respond to social and emotional well-being. We used a developmental evaluation, which I know a lot of the crew at Menzies are really fond of as well, because it's really great for complex environments and learning as you go, rather than kind of implementing something, getting to the end and going, oh, well, turns out we could have been adapting and changing as we went. So that's what we utilised in the Cultural Pathways program, a really sort of reflective and embedded approach. And yeah, we used all sorts of data sources around, we had program development, so that's the reflective type of stuff that was happening throughout implementation. We had all of our program data. I'm really sad to see my Emma's dropped down. We had program data, and we also had some other sources. So we did some yarns with participants, so that was participant experiences, the facilitators who implemented the program, and also mental health was an iterative kind of finding of our project. And so I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And so we followed the Aboriginal diabetes study around for a couple of years, and for want of a better word, as they went to field and they conduct comprehensive sort of clinical assessments, and they also have social sort of screening within that, but they didn't have a capacity to sort of follow up on those social needs, a little bit like the question raised in the last presentation. If we ask about mental health, or we ask about social and emotional well-being, what are we going to do about it? And so this was sort of our response to go, okay, well, we can employ some staff and we can do something about it. And so we had, overall, you can see from the diabetes study, like this was just sort of a period of time. So the cohort's much bigger than that. But while we implemented Pathways, we received 350 referrals. So that was 350 people that said, yeah, I could do with some extra support, or had extra stress or worry, or, weren't feeling the best. And I guess what we like to highlight here is, I guess, the complexity. So from the 350, we sort of ended up with 116 in our study, or that participated in the Pathways program, and lots of things that you would expect from that, not being able to find people again when we were calling up to sort of follow them up, or not being able to engage them sort of after their original diabetes study appointment. So what we implemented in the model for Pathways was really, it's very standard sort of case management type model. We had a culturally adapted screening tool, or developed screening tool, I should say. So we developed this in Wadley Paringa, and really it's a social and cultural screen. So it's a social and emotional wellbeing screen. It's a practice tool. So the point of it is to ask questions about all of the domains that kind of model against social and emotional wellbeing, and find out what might be happening for people, and then that directs the service response. And so you can see up there that people had a lot of complexity. So of all our 116 participants, I think it was an average of 8.4 domains for each participant out of properly 14. So, really complex unmet needs. And actually the highest that we had was for, so our psychosocial question, or our mental health question, was, have you been feeling unhappy or no good in yourself or your spirit? And of our 116 participants, 84 told us that they had. So we'll talk a little more about mental health in particular. I guess maybe context first. Around all of that process after the screening, what happened is we had that participant-led goal setting process. We actually utilised the Aim High, Staying Strong sort of care planning documents, and we really love the strengths-based approach that's in those. And we would talk to participants about what their priorities were, and they would say what they wanted to work on. And so whilst most participants identified unmet mental health needs, the primary thing people wanted to work with us on was like material circumstances, you know, money and food. It's not to be unexpected at all. And they were really important. And we definitely, we had lots of, you know, we did service mapping. We were able to connect people up with services. We had really good referral pathways and networks to kind of work on some of those issues. But the mental health story, like we said, so many people told us it was important. And then once we got, and over time, we had lots of reflections that the facilitators had challenges, you know, either finding appropriate services for mental health needs or even, you know, getting people to want to follow up on it. So since we were so participant led, a lot of the time we had participants say, no, I don't, it's fine. I'm not really wanting to work on that. I just need help with my money, or I just need help with food. And so we just did a little bit of exploration into the mental health story a little bit more. And some of the things that we learned was it's really important not just to ask the question, but obviously what we're going to do about it after. And I think that remains a challenge. You know, we considered ourselves to be really good sort of in the clinical sense about having these conversations and encouraging it, yet we still had a lot of trouble being able to get people to engage with mental health supports and services. Plus, we have real issues in South Australia, and I know it's definitely the case everywhere, that there aren't many culturally appropriate services available for mental health. And so, you know, short of going, you know, accessing through mainstream 10 visits through your GP to see a counsellor who's non-Aboriginal and has no context of what's happening for you, we had sort of little recourse. So I guess that's the really critical finding for us around, you know, a lot of our findings, what we really found in Pathways was that we had a lot of a need for more systemic responses. And so this is just a little summary of the model. Like I said, it's very much case management. We receive a referral, we implement, you know, a process to identify the needs. We did strengths-based case management, goal setting with a focus on service connection. So across all those domains, making sure people had what they needed, and a really big focus on the data collection behind it. So one of the things that we understand, or definitely what I understood as a social worker coming into this context, is that nobody really knows what a social worker does, or nobody really knows what a social and emotional wellbeing worker does. But if you're one of them or you work with them, you know they do everything. And there's just no reflection of that in the data. And so we really set out to have really strong data collection measures around how can we show, because we know that funding is an issue, you know, in community controlled in particular for social and emotional wellbeing and sort of mental health. It's not part of the funding, and all of our organisations are creatively implementing these services because community need it. They're not funded to do it. So we really set up a lot of, you know, structures that we think can help in terms of data collection. So there's some of our really key kind of findings. And so, yeah, I guess you know, in a PhD thesis, you end up with a whole lot of, you know, learnings. They're huge. But in terms of what's really, I guess, the main thing that I focused on was around practice recommendations and what could actually, you know, what actually really needs to happen more in the everyday of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health around being able to move from knowledge to action. And so some of the things around clear and consistent conceptualization and articulation of the social determinants of health. So I think collectively we really need to understand what we mean when we say social determinants, and that also means, you know, that they're different to cultural determinants, structural determinants, and, you know, all of these other factors. And so really just understanding and conceptualizing clearly what we mean. We definitely need a lot more strengths-based principles in practice, which really strengthens ways of working. And so, you know, that's what we really found, focusing less on what wasn't working for people and a lot more on what they needed more of, what strengths and resources they had, you know, is really important. We also to develop and implement therapeutic clinical approaches. So that comes back a little bit to what I was talking about, where the things like mental health or the broader system. And so, when we're talking to our participants or, I guess clients in the study, and we're saying, what about mental health or these other things? And then they're sort of going, oh, no, thank you. And then, we didn't have a workforce that was there to do a therapeutic intervention. We didn't have, it wasn't set up to spend a long time over a long period of time developing a really in-depth relationship with people and actually doing the clinical mental health work as part of the holistic service. So that's what I mean when I say therapeutic clinical approaches. How do they become embedded in a holistic service response? And so what we had were facilitators, and they were fantastic, and they're often in hospitals as sort of system navigators and these type of roles, and we used a similar role, and it has a huge benefit for people, but I think it doesn't get to getting to the healing that they need or the more therapeutic approach. And we also found that we need approaches which address multi-layered system complexity. So, it's one thing to refer someone for financial counselling because, they're having trouble with money, but that doesn't get them any more money. The issue remains that the allowance that they're on is inadequate, or, so these are the more system issues that that were really highlighted in our work as well. And so I just wanted to share a little bit of one of the things, obviously taking all of these learnings that we had and some other work that we have going on. We have a project in Northern Adelaide, which is really, it was funded in 2020. So we were in COVID times when we started. It took us a little while to get going. But we're currently implementing this within the system in Northern Adelaide, some of the findings of this work, as well as a really extensive co-design process that happened with the community in the north. They told us what they wanted us to do to address social and emotional wellbeing. And I don't have too much time to go through it in depth, but I'll put a QR code up in a second, and you'll be able to go look at the findings in detail. They're up on our website from this study. But we had really extensive yarns with community, and obviously lots of things came up that crossed over with some of our pilot work and findings. And then the critical one, I guess, to highlight is that the community told us we needed more mental health services and social needs assessments embedded within services, which really aligned with the findings we had from my PhD program of work as well. And at the moment, we've just entered into a partnership with Sonda, and they have a safe haven cafe, which they've implemented these. They're a mainstream type approach. It comes from the UK. They're mental health drop-in services. And so they're meant to, prevent people from heading off to EDs or other type services like that. And so we're embedding some of our pilot work and our findings within the safe haven at Salisbury, which is in Northern Adelaide, and, implementing some of the findings around our, our holistic screening tool and our case management sort of broker and connect type services within a mental health drop-in services. And we're going to have a bit of an evaluation. So we're going to keep moving into the system and see how some of that work that we've been doing can have a greater impact. And that's the QR code. So if you're interested in Tangawil Tupa Kawandilla, which means strong community in the north, you can scan that, and up on our website, there's sort of an evidence brief and also the community report, which has a lot more detail about the findings and what the community told us. I'll leave it up for a second. I think I see most phones finished. And so that's pretty much it. I'm happy to take any questions. Unfortunately, I'm heading back today because I wanted to get home to see my kids for the weekend because I've been away all week. But I'm here at morning tea time if anyone wants to have a yarn, or also you can hit me up at my email address. Always happy to share and talk more.
I'm sure everyone would agree that that was incredible. Thank you so much, Tina. That really excites me as a social scientist to hear more great research being done in this space. Does anyone have I think one very, very quick question before we head out to morning tea? Anyone online? No? I would ask you one, but I think we might keep to time and take you up on following up with any further questions. I do want to thank you for for coming and give you a small gift as a token of our appreciation. And we're really excited to keep working with you in some of our youth works going forward. So
Very exciting. Thank
thank you,
you.
Tina.